Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to the Flame of Xulta set review. This is probably the latest set review I've ever done. I'm really sorry that it's taking me so long. I'm being pretty invested with streaming regularly, university has started again, and real life stuff. So yeah, I hope it's still useful to people though, and I'll try to do better the next set around. Anyway, before we dive into the shadow cards, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And now onto the shadow cards. Alright, so first we have the Shadow Emblem. This is a pretty good emblem. I think it's a lot better in more mid-rangey defensive decks because the Deadly makes for good utility and a good trade blocker to trade up, but isn't that impressive on offense. But yeah, in shadow mid-range decks this seems pretty nice. In aggro decks you probably want to prioritize the emblem of the other color first. And I mean, emblems, like I said before, are great in any format really. In Throne I think they have the hardest time because we have so many good duels, and the duels enable you to play certain things that you otherwise couldn't, and then you kind of need the rest of your power slots for sigils to make your seeds work. But if you somehow don't have that high influence requirements and don't need like the full 16 dual faction fixing powers, you can fit in some emblems because they are pretty strong in lower curve decks. Then we have Bloodseeker. This is a pretty sweet card in all three formats really, like even in limited this is a pretty good 1-drop. It's basically a 2-drop that costs 1 and has a small downside, and it can even sometimes become a 4-5 in long games, which is pretty amazing. And yeah, in Constructed this can be interesting in, say, decks like Reanimator potentially as like early defense, although the taking 1 damage part is kind of problematic, but Reanimator can get to like 10 cards pretty quickly, and then having basically a 1-cost 4-5 is really strong. And yeah, in Expedition this is one of the good aggressive 1-drops, and even in Throne this is a pretty good aggressive 1-drop option in, say, a Stone Scar aggressive deck, if that can be viable again. Then we have Edict of Macao. Arguably I would say almost the best edict, in the sense that it kills the biggest units in the game, mostly all the time units, and even some of the justice units, which are pretty impactful in their board presence, and all that for 1 power. And in an aggressive deck where you need the sort of swing the most, even the can't block for a turn is pretty decent against other colors, and this makes for an extremely powerful, extremely swingy market card. As I have mentioned when the merchants came out first, the most powerful market cards are the high impact cheap ones, and it doesn't really get more high impact than a 1-cost kill target unit against the right decks, especially decks where that matters the most, like time decks. So yeah, Edict, amazing market card. Could even be in the right metagame, maybe a main deck consideration in a very aggressive deck, but probably not, also because it's too good in the market, and if you run a smuggler, you can't run it main. So yeah, pretty great card. And in limited, if your deck is aggressive, I can see playing this even in limited. Then we have Faceless One, just a 1-cost 2/1 cultist that can't block, but if you discard it and have shadow influence, you can play it from your void. So basically just kind of a free roll. The problem is a bit that because it can't block, it's not that impressive, because it's only something a proactive deck would want, but most decks that are good at discarding this or milling this aren't that proactive, so it's kind of awkward there. Sure, it can be nice as like sack fodder in like a cultist deck, but cultists don't even have much potential to sort of discard this other than Zoo, and even Zoo is like yeah, very slow and unreliable to build this, and naturally drawing this it's pretty bad. So don't see this being particularly playable in any format. Kamado, I have seen experimenting with some Feln discard deck in Expedition. So with like Echo and these play when you discard them type cards, and yeah, Whispering Wind and that sort of stuff, which is kind of cute, but I don't think it's gonna be like competitive enough. But that's like the best thing that I've seen that could use this card basically. Then we have Fervent Siphoner, the 1/2 Exalted Cultist, and when a player discards a card, it gets +1 attack this turn. The way I understand it, I'm not sure if this actually gives it +1 per card, which might be, but it could also be that like if you mill yourself for 5 with a Spore Folk, that it just turns it into a 2/2. I'm not entirely sure because it's a card you don't really play with much, and even if it turns it into like a 6/2, I don't think it's particularly constructed playable regardless. In Limited, however, it can be an okay filler, but it's not great. And yeah, in Constructed, it's just not playable. Then we have Immortalized. I think in Throne, the card's a bit too weak. Dark Return and the 0-cost recursion card are just too much stronger. They are cheaper. They are more powerful at what they do. A lot of the time, the decks that want to recure stuff don't want to decimate either, and the Exalted is of varying value, especially in Throne, where there's more silence and removal and that sort of stuff to just deal with the thing you exalt onto. But in Expedition, I think the card's really powerful. First of all, there's no alternative to what it does, and second of all, the Exalted is much more powerful with limited and clunky removal. So yeah, a pretty strong Expedition card and pretty strong limited card all in all, or fairly strong limited card. Then we have Macao Evangel, one of the better Evangels I would say, because 2/2 quick draw is pretty solid, and it's an elf, so it's a relevant tribe, but in Constructed, especially in Throne, I don't think it's gonna do a whole lot. In Expedition, it's a bit more of a consideration, but still probably just not gonna do it. Kamado had it in the Feln discard deck to enable Felrog basically, but that's about it. But in Limited, this is a pretty good 2-drop. Next we have Malaise. It's a 2-cost, target player discards the top 6 cards of their deck. I have seen people play this in Reanimator. I'm not the biggest fan because the deck has a fair share of discard and self-mill semi-free roll cards like Contract, Sporefolk, and so on, that I'm not a big fan of using card disadvantage to mill yourself for 6. I don't think that is that strong and that necessary. So not a big fan. Sure, it's nice if you hit like a Felrog, but I don't know. Skeptical of this in Throne Reanimator, and outside of Throne, I think the card is completely unplayable. Next we have Reconnaissance. Card's pretty weak, like in Limited. It can be okay, but even there I'd probably rather not have it in my deck. In Expedition, it's the only format where it is reasonably interesting, basically for like the Argenport Paladin Decimate deck with the 2-drop that makes Decimate free, which is the only way this card is actually not terrible, because otherwise you basically 2-for-1 yourself by sort of sacrificing a power and investing Reconnaissance into dealing some damage and getting 1 card back for the 2 cards you invested. But yeah, if you need more Decimate sources, and Decimate is potentially free because you are in Argenport Paladins in Expedition, this seems pretty reasonable. Sorry, I have no idea why I'm yawning so much. So yeah, Reconnaissance seems okay in that deck, but to be fair, I don't think that deck is very good. Next we have Smoke Dancer. This is a pretty interesting card, mostly for Expedition. I considered it in Throne as well, but in Throne we just have too many 2-drops that are just better than this on average, like Instigator, War Leader, stuff like that, that just doesn't need any condition to be better than the base version of this and isn't much worse or even as good still as the like allied version of this, and more often than not, unless you have Whelp, this is the earliest usually gonna become an ally on like a 4/4 on turn 4, not on turn 3, so missing out on one attack, and also being fragile early on to torch and stuff like that. So you really don't gain that much, and the cultist synergy doesn't really come up in the dragon decks either. In limited, however, if you have a bunch of dragons, pretty nice 2-drop. Then we have Unkindness. Card looks kind of sweet at first glance, but if you think about it, the card's not very good. It's if the opponent didn't play a unit, you sacrifice Unkindness to play 3 1/1 Ravens with flying. I think in limited this might be good enough, because even if this takes a while, at some point it will happen, usually in limited, and then 3 1/1 flyers are pretty good in limited, so I think in limited this is probably pretty solid, but in constructed it's just the opponent has too much control over it. It just costs you like a card and 2 power to possibly never even impact the game. So yeah, I would not recommend putting this in constructed decks. Then we have Calamity Oracle. The 3 cost 1/3. It's an elf, so that's kind of relevant. And then yeah, when you play a curse, enemy player discards the top 5 cards of the deck, so more like mill your opponent out type cards. But yeah, I don't think that's particularly viable as a strategy, and against some decks you might even help the opponent. So would not play this in any format. Then we have Let's Ride Dead Drop, the elf bargain card. And yeah, 3 cost, draw 2 cards, and you take 2 damage for each enemy unit, which is quite a lot of damage real fast. Like taking 2 is fine, taking 4 is already a lot, and anything more than that is insane. But yeah, if you hit the enemy player with 2 or more elves, you can play this from your market for free, which is kind of neat, but it also comes at a fairly high price. But against the decks where like grinding matters, you also probably take the least damage, and the damage matters the least. So it's kind of ranges from great to almost useless depending on the matchup really. But yeah, if you somehow into Fallen Elves, this is probably going to make its way into your market still. And in like Expedition, there are fringe circumstances where I could see considering this main, because there are not a lot of card draw options. And yeah, in limited, depends on your deck, I guess, if you want to play this or not. Yeah, then we have a limited only card, Macao's Blood Wolf, 3 cost 2/3 lifesteal with mastery 6, gain +2/+2. So yeah, if you have some decent support to help this mastery, seems like a pretty powerful limited card, but that's all that it is. And then last but not least for part 1, we have Spectral Size. Basically just a 3 cost 2/3 weapon. Sure, you can attack the opponent if there's like a board stall on both sides, for example. Just kind of hit them for 2, which is kind of neat. But I think all in all, constructed, the card's pretty bad. It's too weak of a weapon. The unblockable isn't relevant enough. And yeah. So in limited, this is a decent relic weapon, I would say. I mean, it's a bit better than the green common version, which was like the baton, which was pretty solid. Alright, that's gonna be it for part 1. I'll be back in a moment with the second half of the shadow cards. Stay tuned.